A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I begin, as always, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. I want to thank the organizers and Professor Imran and the Institute for this opportunity. I enclosed some bullet points for your benefit, and I'm also not going to go through all of them, but actually I'm going to do three things. The first thing is to have a very brief conversation about the F word, and then I'm going to show part of a PowerPoint, and I'll explain why when I get there. And then the last thing I will do is just to say a few concrete things about this publication, Men in Charge, ? Rethinking Authority in Muslim Legal Tradition. We are experiencing a critical mass of Muslim women's agency in directing the conversations about what it means to be Muslim and female today. At no other time in history has there been a duplication of what we're seeing today. And that is that women are involved at every level and in every aspect of what the experience of being Muslim is like, in every context. Yes, that includes Saudi Arabia, in case somebody wants to ask. But women are not all going about it in the same way, with the exception of my making the notation that this taking of agency is unique. Even at the advent of Islam, when there were so many benefits, particularly addressed to the social welfare of women, they were not themselves the agents. They were the beneficiaries of the movement that was initiated by the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace, as an outcome of the revelation of the Qur'an. So in this case now, it's the women themselves who are determining, how they want to live as Muslims. And so it's a very, very exciting time. Obviously, when we like to talk about all communities as not being monolithic, because women are not all alike, they don't go about this the same way. There are three primary, I guess you would say, methods. I want to talk about how the three came about, because in 1995 at the Beijing Global Conference for Women, there were two primary voices distinction to each other, from which came this third voice. The main two voices were the secular Muslim feminist, and they were adamant that you can't have a conversation about human rights and human dignity that includes religion, that religion needs to stay out of the conversation. And the other voice that was there was the Islamist voice. And they wanted to promote the wisdom behind Islamic perspective on women and the roles of women. But of course, Islam was uninterrogated, and eventually it becomes very clear that the understanding of Islam that they have replicates certain ideas of relationships of inequality, the superiority of men over women, and the like. And those two voices were in agreement that you cannot have both Islam and human rights. And the third position that evolved and became crystallized into what we now call Islamic feminism was the position that, number one, the experiences of women matter. They matter for everything. They matter for how we read and understand and apply the Qur'an, and for how we form families, and for how we adjudicate those families in Muslim personal status law, as well as for how we form societies or political realities and governments, and that they need to be present with their experiences as a marker for whether or not those systems are inclusive of their well-being. So we advocated that you can have both Islam and human rights as long as you step back and understand that somebody is defining both Islam and human rights. Obviously, they're also defining feminism. So I'm going to go to the basic definition that feminism is the radical idea that women are human beings. Well, guess what? When you go back to that definition, you also find within it is the notion of the human being. And the notion of the human being has never been static. And in the middle part of the previous century, with the formulation of the United Nations, an effort was made to try to come up with a universal understanding of human rights, and yet that effort was pretty much spearheaded by the same architects of colonialism itself. So it was problematic in many communities, amongst them the Muslim communities, who came up with an alternative universal understanding of human rights from an Islamic perspective. And what Islamic feminism requires then is some kind of coherence about all of the elements that are used to construct a certain kind of understanding of things like human rights, Islam, like feminism. And there is no passive receiving of a fixed definition from someone if you have not also participated in the construction of that idea by challenging the idea to address the realities. And one of the primary features of Islamic feminism is the recognition that Islamic primary sources are still crucial to the articulation of justice and dignity for Muslim women, but that the equal participation of women in the construction of what we consider to be fundamental to Islam was not present, and we need to correct that. In particular, we do that by engaging gender as a category of thought. So when I say gender here, I'm not just talking about women, but actually to look at the rubrics of understanding and the rhetorical devices that are used to make a conversation, let alone to adjudicate those conversations or to acculturate underneath those same conversations, that you actually have to look radically at the extent to which there is a consistent conversation about what it means to be a human being, or in the case of Islam, what it means to be a believer, and what it is to be in the categories of other. By the way, there are many categories, but for the moment, we're just going to talk about being female. So I have some more notes on it because obviously feminism, even within the Muslim community, is diverse. And the distinction with Islamic feminism is that it is also a knowledge-building project with the understanding that Islam is a living system, and that to have that system be meaningful, all the people who adhere to that system have to have equal part in how the system is constructed. So one of the aspects of our work is a deconstruction of some of the ideas of authority, and as a consequence, the need to be able to my timer says 7 minutes and 52 seconds, so I still have a little bit more than 5 minutes. And the need to be able to democratize our notions of authority, and that's another conversation which I won't get into. The conversation for this meeting is, how does the Qur'an inform the community, and how does the community, that you're here to represent, interact with the Qur'an? And so for that reason, I'm going to just show some of the slides in this PowerPoint. It was my intention to create one specifically for you guys, but I'm not going to do it. But I want to talk a little bit about the Tawhidic paradigm and how it is fundamental to the work that we do. I'm not going to do any of this. I'm sorry, I'm just going to go through it because I have basically said a little bit about Islam and feminisms and the significance of looking back at the notion of what it means to be a human being. For us, in the context of believers, we do use the Qur'anic conversations about cosmology and eschatology, and there are lots of details that go with it, none of which I'm going to share with you today because I want to get to how we bring these together and talk about what is the overarching principle of Islam, which is Tawhid. So the Islamic worldview is encapsulated between its notion of cosmology on one hand and eschatology on the other. And Tawhid is the umbrella term which encompasses the world, the place where we really live. The notion of Tawhid has complete consensus. It's not going forward. There we go. And it goes like this. St. Augustine said, imagine, and I want you to do this, imagine. Imagine that God is a circle, the center of which is everywhere, the circumference of which is nowhere. Now, the world is not two-dimensional, so imagine it as a sphere. So God is everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. And in Eastern traditions, when they talk about the yin and the yang, they talk about the relationship between these two forces, and they have a kind of harmonious relationship, including the fact that there's a bit of each in each other, and it is dynamic. It's not static, okay? In Tawhid, then we build upon the idea not only that God is one, Qul huwallahu ahad, and other verses, that Allah is united, La ilaha illallah, that Allah is unique, Laysa kamithlihi shay'un. By the way, min kulli shay'in khalaqna zawjayn, from all things we created the pair, means that God cannot be male or female. And more importantly, for what I'm going to follow up with, that Allah unites. And of course, we have this conversation about tashbih and tanziz, which I'm not going to get into any details about, but they must come together in Tawhid, and also that's three-dimensional. In all of my study and research in Islam, I noticed that all of the main corpus worked under an understanding of Allah as the highest focal point, with a single arrow direction to the male and then to the female. And sometimes this conversation is very aesthetic, including the pen and the tablet. The pen cannot write if it doesn't have the tablet or the sheets, or the heaven and the earth, whatever the heavens lets down, the earth must pick up. But still, there's a kind of single direction. And I found this problematic, and obviously the most problematic thing is that there is a separation here between the female and Allah, and that is categorically contradictory to the notion of no intermediary that is essential to Islam. So I played around with this, and I realized that the construct itself was not working and that we needed a new construct. So I came up with this one, which allows for both the male and the female to have a reciprocal relationship with God, and it's direct and unmediated. And as a consequence of it, if we consider Allah to be the highest focal point, then on the grounds of Tawhid, there can be no relationship between the male and the female except for one of equality and reciprocity. That's called Musawa. Musawa is a global movement that is responsible for the publication of this book, Men in Charge, which is a detailed investigation of the terms of Qiwama and Wilaya, that is, Qiwama being constructed as a kind of system of relationships that require women to be protected and maintained by men. And that was the fundamental basis of all of Islamic personal status law and much of Muslim culture, and obviously has its patriarchal roots. And we looked at the chronology of the Qur'an, and we saw that Qiwama as a construct began to be built and to be enhanced by other fields of knowledge, social sciences, medicine, or whatever the heck it is, and that by itself it is not a static term. But that the relationship of equality and reciprocity, or musawa, also fundamentally is present in the Qur'an. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً, we made between you love and loving intimacy and mercy, or compassion, but that the jurists did not choose to build their notions of personal status law on that concept. They chose to build it on Qiwama, therefore they began to inflate the meaning of Qiwama and then to fix it as if it was required and divine. So once we challenge it, it becomes necessary to compare whether or not the manifests or the realities for Muslim women actually demonstrate that the term is completing what it is that the jurists are saying it's supposed to complete, which is the well-being of women. So we also engage in life stories and the lived realities of Muslim women to show that there has been a disjuncture between the representation of justice and well-being in their lives. Thank you very much. 14 minutes and 39 seconds.
Okay, I think that we'd like to open the floor to questions for Professor Wadud. So I think we have 15 minutes, so please feel free.
Don't all speak at once.
Please.
So could you elaborate more on the Islamist voices with regard to issues of gender equality? Because Islamism also responsible for bringing women to the public sphere, allowing them to vote, and I think so it seems to me that Islamism brings some sort of actual social change already in the patriarchal culture in which these things are happening.
Yes, that's why I said that there were three major voices of gender reform, and I included the Islamist voice as one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with that.
So what extension that these things can go? Can these things, for example, adopt some of these paradigms that you're suggesting for?
Well, what's interesting is that in point of fact, from within the Islamist discourse, there have been more converts to feminism than there have from secular feminists. So when you have a grounding in, especially, your belief that Islam is the right way, the only addition that we're trying to make to it is who's Islam and how was it constructed. And what we actually do is we actively train people in the communities to look at the construction of Islam through its own primary sources, and how those constructions also at one and the same time give this potential for full human agency of all beings, but at the same time how they get to be used and usurped in order to be able to sustain and promote patriarchy. So the radical difference, of course, is that we don't take the definitions for granted, and there is a critical engagement not only with the constructs as they exist, but also with making new constructs.
Yes. Amina, I have read your book, which is very deep, and your talk was very comprehensive. But you basically talk about the concept of khilafah and wilayah and masawat at some level. And you start with the khilafah, or the agency of human beings being man and woman, both of them being Khalifatullah, if I rightly understand. Where do you start the khilafah in the world that we live? Where do you start the khilafah from?
Okay, so I'm not talking about Khilafah as a political entity. I'm talking about Khilafah based on the cosmology, Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. And that was before there were any systems. In fact, there was before there was any human beings.
Not about the political khilafah. You are talking about the Khalifatullah on earth. Khalifatullah on earth from Adam.
Yes.
Where do you place Adam in the cosmology? Where do you place Adam?
I placed Adam as a representation of the creation of human beings. So every human being is created to be a Khalifa of Allah. That is the basic ontology of what it is to be human.
The first created human being?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
I don't say Adam is, I say nafsun wahida, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, nafsun wahida, that's what I'm hitting at. Nafsun wahida was not Adam, nafsun wahida was feminine.
Yes.
خلقها من زوجها.
Yes.
نفس واحدة خلقها من زوجها. That was the feminine, not Adam, it was Eve at all.
Yes, I have written about that extensively. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, you got a question?
Walaikum salam.
This is building a little bit on what we were talking about last night, but I'd love to hear you. I'm really struck by your definition of feminism emerges from the radical idea that women are human beings, and the project that you're trying to do on trying to identify what it means to be a human being from a Islamic point of view. Can you talk a little bit more about, are there certain sort of anchoring ideas that you believe are central to this definition as you're working on it?
Yes, I think the three of them would be the khilafah of the human being. Did I say three? I think that they would be the khilafah of the human being. When people ask me what's the role of woman, I would say the role is to be a khalifa. And the khalifa is a representative of what we find in traditional sources is considered to be the will of Allah, but the will of Allah gets quickly conflated into fiqh, to follow halal and haram. But actually, I draw it back further, and that the will of Allah is the order of the entire cosmos. So anything that violates the integrity of the order of the universe is going against the khilafah, and anything that establishes it is an affirmation of khilafah. So that is fundamentally what it means to be a human being, and that's obviously important. And the second is Tawhid, which is a rubric not only of an affirmation of belief in Allah, but also the integration of that belief into your relationships with other human beings on the planet, not just your relationships with people who are like you, not just your relationship of men to men, or Muslim to Muslim, but relationships of each human being to each human being, because all systems are being constructed, all communities are being formed from those human beings, and somehow we have encoded fundamentally different notions of what it means to be a human being. Some human beings are not fully equal, as in the case of slavery and its practice in Muslim hands. So to engage the Tawhid as a fail-safe test of whether or not the value of the life of every Khalifa is considered equal, but what that equality means in actual practice in terms of constructing political systems, family systems, international relations, and the like. The last thing is the concept of justice. That the concept of justice is not static, and during the formulation of the fiqh, the concept of justice was one of benevolence, and certain people were extended this benevolence from those who were actually fully human agents, women, children, slaves, dhimmis, and to interrogate that in such a way as to be able to come up with a concept of justice that means the basic equality of every human being, and then to grapple with that in the real life formations of actual families, actual communities, and actual governments, and actual relationships at the international level, because ultimately then we go back. It's about your relationship to your creator, and whether or not you are creating a system that will allow you to fulfill your khilafah, that is your capacity to be able to live within the cosmic order of the universe, and therefore be in surrender to Allah. So it goes back and forth, but those are the main: khilafah, tawheed, and justice.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, with that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've been following your thought, and I think it's just brilliant. I think you're doing some great work. The question that I had is more in the practical, pragmatic level, right? So we have all these institutional structures that we've inherited, right? For better, for worse, right? How do you, because you have these ideals, and then you have these institutional structures that you have to deal with in all society. How do you implement these ideals? Because you have these structures, you totally destroy them? Do you propose new institutions, or how does this?
I do recommend that you get the book. And the reason that I recommend that you get the book is because my main area is Qur'anic studies, and theology. So I'm interested in the sort of utopian ideals. And with the launching of Musawa in 2009, something happened in my lifetime that I literally thought I would never see, and as a consequence, it was only then that I myself was able to take the name feminist, and that was the way to be able to implement those ideas in a variety of different practical steps. And so there are, a plethora of examples of how this works, and I'm not going to make you get the book in order to get a thumbnail sketch of what that is, but what happens is that in the case of many Muslim communities, whether they're in majority Muslim nation states or some minority nation states, like for example India, where there's a sizable population, the implementation of Muslim personal status law is irredeemably patriarchal. And so we have designated that as the focus point of the work that we do. But there's not a single priority that everybody has, unless you want to say, building justice instead of patriarchy. What we have developed in the movement is an understanding that the representatives of, different countries have to be able to prioritize what are their needs, and we can give them multiple strategies about how to be able to alleviate it. And the strategies are really very pragmatic, because what we live in today is the reality of the nation state, for good or ill. And the nation state, with the exception, of Saudi Arabia, also has a constitution. And there's a disjuncture between the constitution in most of those places and what they allow in Muslim personal status law. So, for example, in Jordan, if a man marries a non-Jordanian woman, he can pass his citizenship on to his child. But if a Jordanian woman marries a non-Jordanian man, she cannot. So that means that the Constitution has a leak in it, and they justify that leak on the basis of their quote-unquote understanding of Muslim personal status law. But also in terms of the United Nations, CEDAW, the Committee for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which have been signed by most Muslim majority countries, not by the United States, they are accountable to the UN in these reports that come out annually. We use this as an instrument because women will document the realities on the ground and show, again, the disjuncture between what the government might be trying to propose to the UN that is a limit because of quote-unquote Islam, and also what it is that they're not doing despite what they're saying that they have agreed to do. And when they hold reservations against some of the articles of CEDAW, one of the things that we do is a level of advocacy at the international level to indicate that there is no one static notion of Islam. And we demonstrate this by the actual way in which these things are being implemented. So they will tell you it's divine law. And if it's divine law, how can you have one law, in Pakistan and then have another law in Jordan for whatever specific thing it is? Because it's, it's not, you really have to look at the details. And we juxtapose that to these reports that we do on women's lived reality. Whether or not women are actually experiencing the justice that everybody says is fundamental to Islam, and we give that as a kind of illah, a kind of evidentiary basis for saying there's something wrong, and then we use these alternative interpretations like the work that I've done in order to promote the idea that in Islam equality is what is mandated, and that is an element of justice, and so we just keep going. And again, there's never any one location based on what's happening in a particular nation state, and therefore there's a two-directional thing. We have to learn from people who want to better address what's happening in their own context, and then we have to also talk about the Islamic intellectual tradition and the resources that we have in different ways in which those resources are at our disposal in order to challenge when the government says you can't do that, that's not Islam. It's a very exciting time, really.
Okay, I think we're going to have to close right now, but I think we'd definitely like to pay tribute to Professor Wadud as a pathfinder, as a trailblazer.
Thank you so much.